The classroom went silent the moment Mrs. Dalton's hand ripped straight through the center of the poster, and she sneered. Your mom can't be a 4-star general. But what she didn't know, what no one in room 312 at Lincoln Ridge Middle School could have imagined, was that before the final bell rang that afternoon, a real 4-star general would walk through those doors and freeze her where she stood. 3 hours earlier, 12-year-old Nia Carter had stepped carefully through the drizzle. Outside the school entrance, her trifold presentation board wrapped in plastic, her fingers gripping it tightly not because she feared the rain, but because she feared something else she couldn't quite name, a quiet dread that had followed her all semester in Mrs. Dalton's class, the same class where she had been questioned about her new sneakers. Those cost over $100, Nia. Are you sure you didn't borrow them? The same class where her essay about battlefield strategy had been returned with a red note that read, "This vocabulary seems advanced for someone with your background." The same class where every time she mentioned her mother's deployment someone would raise an eyebrow, as if deployment were a storybook word instead of a lived reality. But today was supposed to be different, because today was the My Hero presentation worth 20% of her semester grade, and Nia had poured herself into. If for 2 weeks, staying up late at the kitchen table of their Brookside Terrace apartment while her grandmother dozed in the recliner and her little brother colored beside her, carefully printing photos of her mother in dress blues, trimming each image with precise scissors, aligning the captions perfectly. Kuwait 2012, Germany 2016, Joint Chiefs Briefing 2021, Pentagon Strategy Session 2025, and at the very top in gold marker, she had written My Hero, General Adrienne Carter, for silver. Stars drawn meticulously beside her mother's name. Her mom had helped her the night before over video call from Washington, still in uniform, exhaustion lining her face but pride shining in her eyes as she said, "It's beautiful, baby girl. Just tell your truth and stand in it." And Nia had believed that would be enough, believed that truth by itself had weight, had power, had protection. So when Mrs. Dalton called her name just after lunch and Nia walked to the front of the classroom, smoothing her braids and clearing her throat, she felt nervous but proud, 27 pairs of eyes watching as she began. My hero is my mother, General Adrienne Carter, Deputy Chief of, and that's when Mrs. Dalton's smile vanished, not slowly, but instantly, like a light switch flipped off, her eyes narrowing at the photograph of a tall black woman in full army dress uniform with 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder, the Pentagon seal faintly visible behind her. "Excuse me," Mrs. Dalton interrupted sharply, stepping closer, heels clicking against the tile. "Did you say 4-star general?" And Nia nodded, her voice steady though her palms had begun to sweat. "Yes, ma'am." And a few students exchanged glances because even they knew 4-star generals were rare, the kind of rank you saw on the news standing beside presidents, not the kind of parent you imagined living in a 2-bedroom apartment off Brookside Drive. Mrs. Dalton let out a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes and turned toward the class, as if inviting them into a private joke. "Class, do you know how many 4-star generals there are in the entire United States Army?" No one answered, and she didn't wait. "Very few. And I find it extremely hard to believe that one of them is the mother of a 7th grader in this classroom." The words hanging heavy in the air as Nia felt heat crawl up her neck but forced herself to continue, pointing to the timeline on the board. She enlisted at 18, earned her commission through ROTC, served in, but Mrs. Dalton cut her off again. "Nia, exaggerating a parent's job to make yourself seem important is not acceptable." A murmur rippling through the room as Nia blinked, confusion mixing with humiliation. "I'm not exaggerating," she said quietly. "She's at the Pentagon this week. I can call her." And that's when Mrs. Dalton's expression hardened completely, arms crossing over her chest as she leaned down slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough to keep the class from hearing. 4-star generals don't live in subsidized housing, Nia. They don't have children on the free lunch list. And they certainly don't need to send their kids to public middle schools like this. The implication clear, the judgment sharper than any raised voice, and something inside Nia cracked. Not her confidence, not yet, but her innocence, the belief that adults would at least check before accusing. But she still stood tall and repeated, "You can call her." And Mrs. Dalton shook her head slowly, reaching out and gripping the top of the poster board. "This is what we call attention-seeking behavior." she announced to the class. Sometimes students invent stories because they want validation. And before Nia could react, before she could even process what was happening, Mrs. Dalton yanked the board toward her and tore it cleanly down the middle, the sound loud and violent in the stunned silence. Gasps filling the room as the image of General Carter split in two, one half fluttering to the floor at Nia's feet, the other still clutched in Mrs. Dalton's hand. "This project receives a 0, she declared, ripping the remaining half again so that the 4 silver stars scattered like metallic confetti across the tile. "And you'll write a 5-page essay on honesty." And though Nia's vision blurred, she refused to let tears fall, instead kneeling slowly to gather the torn pieces of her mother's face, while somewhere in the third row a student discreetly raised his phone and pressed record. Capturing the moment, Mrs. Dalton said, almost casually, "People from places like Brookside don't just become generals." Words that would echo far beyond room 312 before the day was done. By the time Nia Carter sat down outside Principal Harmon's office, the humiliation had settled into something heavier than tears, something quieter and more dangerous, because she kept replaying the sound of her poster ripping in half and the way Mrs. Dalton had said, "People from places like Brookside don't become 4-star generals," as if she were stating a scientific fact instead of a personal assumption. The pink referral slip rested in Nia's hands. The words "academic dishonesty" circled twice in red ink, and she wondered how telling the truth had somehow become misconduct, how pride had become punishment, and how no one in that classroom had stood out except for the faint glow of a phone camera she'd noticed in the third row. This wasn't new territory, just a louder version of the same doubt Mrs. Dalton had shown all semester, from questioning how Nia could afford her tablet. "Are you sure this really belongs to you?" To accusing her of plagiarism on an essay about military leadership because it was too advanced, to raising an eyebrow every time Nia mentioned the Pentagon as if it were a fictional place instead of where her mother worked long hours drafting strategy memos and briefing senior officials. When Principal Harmon finally called her in, he adjusted his glasses and read the referral slowly, sighing like he'd seen this before. "Nia, your teacher says you fabricated your mother's military rank." And even though she'd already defended herself once, she felt the need to stand straighter now. "I didn't fabricate anything. My mom is General Adrienne Carter. She's at the Pentagon this week." But he leaned back in his chair with a look that wasn't angry, just skeptical, and somehow that was worse. "You understand why that's difficult to believe," he said carefully, glancing at her file on the screen. "There are very few 4-star generals." And she nodded because she knew that better than anyone. She'd watched her mother earn each promotion, watched the ceremonies, the salutes, the quiet late-night strategy calls from their apartment kitchen. But none of that was written in the school system. What was written instead was Brookside Terrace Apartments, subsidized lunch program, emergency contact listed as grandmother during deployments, and Principal Harmon cleared his throat. The context doesn't quite align. And she felt the sting of that word align because it meant he'd already decided the truth didn't fit the image he had in his head. "You can call her," she said again, softer now but steady. "She'll answer." Yet he shook his head. "It's not appropriate to contact high-ranking military officials over a classroom assignment." And then he added, almost as an afterthought, "These kinds of exaggerations happen sometimes. Students want to impress their peers." And that was the moment Nia realized this conversation wasn't about verification. It was about plausibility, about what seemed believable coming from someone like her. Her phone buzzed in her hoodie pocket, and she glanced down at the message from her mom. "How did it go?" And she hesitated only a second before typing back. Asterisk, she tore it up. "Said I made it up." Asterisk, and the reply came so quickly it startled her. Asterisk, "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." Asterisk followed seconds later by another notification from a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk, "This is Colonel Hayes. Your mom called. Sit tight." Asterisk, and across the desk Principal Harmon was still talking about scheduling a parent conference, about reviewing academic standards, about giving her an opportunity to clarify expectations, when the front office door suddenly chimed open and the secretary stood up so fast her chair rolled backward into the file cabinet. 2 Army officers stepped inside first, uniforms immaculate, medals gleaming under fluorescent lights, their presence alone enough to make the air shift, and behind them walked a tall woman in a dark suit carrying a portfolio, and then, a beat later, the room seemed to inhale collectively because the final figure who entered wore full dress blues with 4 unmistakable silver stars shining on each shoulder, her posture calm, controlled, authoritative, and Nia didn't need an introduction to know who it was. She recognized that silhouette from years of ceremonies and homecomings. And as Principal Harmon slowly rose from his chair, confusion melting into shock, and as Mrs. Dalton appeared frozen in the hallway outside the office door, Nia felt something inside her steady itself, because the same truth that had been dismissed an hour ago had just walked into Lincoln Ridge Middle School in full uniform, and this time, no one was laughing. When General Adrienne Carter stepped fully into the front office of Lincoln Ridge Middle School, the room shifted from doubt to disbelief in a single breath, because authority has a presence that doesn't need to raise its voice, and 4 silver stars carry weight no referral slip ever could. Principal Harmon stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor, Mrs. Dalton lingering pale and speechless near the doorway as the general removed her gloves with slow precision, her eyes moving first to her daughter before settling on the adults who had questioned her existence. And though her tone remained controlled, every word landed sharp. "I'm here because my daughter was accused of committing a federal crime for telling the truth." Silence swallowing the office whole as one of the accompanying officers quietly placed a folder on the desk: service record, official biography, Pentagon directory listing, documents no one had bothered to look up before tearing apart a child's project. "Mrs. Dalton's voice trembled. I didn't know." But General Carter's reply was steady. "You didn't check." And that distinction mattered, because ignorance born from assumption is not innocence. It is choice. And she turned then to Nia, kneeling slightly so they were eye to eye, her expression softening in a way that contrasted sharply with the rigid tension filling the room. "You never shrink your truth to fit someone else's imagination," she said gently, and in that moment the humiliation Nia had carried all afternoon began to loosen its grip. The apologies that followed were rushed and clumsy. Talk of misunderstandings, of internal reviews, of reconsidered grades. But the real lesson wasn't written on any amended report card. It was etched into the faces of the students who had watched the video that circulated by evening, into the staff who suddenly spoke in quieter tones about bias training and accountability, and to the adults who realized that plausibility should never depend on zip codes or skin tone. The next morning, Nia returned to school not with a torn poster, but with a new laminated one bearing the official Pentagon seal. And when she stood again in room 312 to finish her presentation, no one interrupted, no one laughed, because the story had changed, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed what happens when assumptions collide with reality. Yet as the applause faded and policies were promised and consequences discussed, one truth lingered heavier than the rest. Nia should not have needed 4 stars walking through a doorway to be believed in the first place. And the real victory was not that her mother held rank, but that her voice, steady and unwavering, had been right all along.